Welcome back. This is our third installment of the Scripting with JavaScript. Now, I want to point out that I will not be going deep into the weeds on higher level languages at this moment. So when I say higher level languages, I'm meaning scripting languages. Higher level such as TypeScript or frameworks or the libraries like jQuery. In this class, I'm going to go strictly into JavaScript. I do want to point out that those other classes are more than likely going to be expounded upon in my lessons that I have on my site, and so feel free to come look at them at your leisure. The last class, we spoke a lot about the document object model. In this class, I want to start our development, and I want to start it at a point where I think everyone is ready, which is, what in the heck do I need to do to start developing in JavaScript? Well, it's really simple, right? The first thing we need to understand when we develop in JavaScript is how we can compartmentalize the data we need. Now, what does that mean? What do we talk about when we say data? Data is a collection, or data is literally the points of data, if you will, because data is the atomic version of information. Put it that way. I was going to say I can't describe it, but I don't like using the same word in my definition. Data is a atomic version, or the atomic parts of information, and information is data that's been compiled to represent something. Which is why you might always hear me say, if you ask me a question about statistics, you can make statistics mean anything you want. Because statistics are literally a compilation of data points. Now, this might sound weird, because you might be saying, well, hold on, what about the statistics that go on in the real world with real world things scientifically? Like understanding the way a computer works with enough RAM. Or if you take it a little more specific, how one specific medicine works better than another. Well, it's all about same world statistics across the board. Now, when I say that a statistic can be made to say whatever you want it to say, that's based on the data point. If there are governors around what everything is supposed to say, meaning not governors like you can't say this, you can't say that, but governors like, well, if we measure this with the same ruler, if we measure this with the same unit of measurement, if we measure this with the same rubric, the same measuring stick, we should get formalized results. Now, if you went outside and you were building a garden bed and you measured one garden bed using a metric ruler, and then you measured the other garden bed using inches when you built them, you would more likely get different size proportions of those beds. Now, of course, in the real world, we would always give different size proportions. That always happens. There's no way you can specifically get something to be exactly the same as the other in real world. You can't. It's very, very hard. You can get close, but it's very hard to get as specific to the point of perfection that both are completely identical in size, right? But if you use the same unit of measurement, you can get close. If you don't use the same unit of measurement, you can't. Now, why am I saying this? Well, because data is very important to us as computer scientists and developers. Data, in and of itself, gives us the means by which we can build the information we want to display. Now, with this being said, you need to be able to save your data in a way that is easily retrievable, so you can use it when you want to. I'm going to take a very simple way of doing this. Let's look at the hello world for a second. Now, I'm going to put something behind the hello world so that I have an opportunity to manipulate it simply. I'm going to put a span after this. Now, what a span is in HTML is it's basically a position in your page, right? It doesn't really have any purpose. It's there, and it allows you to modify whatever's in the span tag with a specific style. It also allows you to manipulate what can be in the span tag using JavaScript. So in this case, I'm going to give it an ID, and I'm going to name this, hdubs mod, right? I like to put dashes in my IDs and classes. It's cleaner, right? So HW hello world dash mod. I should call this name actually, because what I want to do is at the end of this. So at the end of hello world, I actually want to put my name. So how would I do that? Well, I could just type it in, right? And run this, and it would show up. Hello world, Francis Fiskey. But what if that was not going to stay the same? What if I was going to grab that data from somewhere else? Well, then this changes, right? This changes dramatically. So what I want to do is I might want to go grab a data set and then take the names in those data sets, and based on the user that logs in, I want them to see their name. Now that's different. But it would be disadvantageous to you if you built a web page for each specific user manually. So how will we do this by it not being manual? Well, firstly, we need to store that data using a specific memory store in our code. Now, I'm still going to make it manual, but we're going to make it manual from the perspective that this JavaScript will be the thing that is manipulated versus the HTML. We want our HTML to stay static. It is a static language. Your JavaScript is what changes that within the document object model. There's that word again. So, first things first, we can say var. Now, at its lowest level, a var is a variable that exists hoisted within your script. Now, there's some positives and negatives to the word hoisting. What hoisting does is when JavaScript is executed, each line is read by the browser's interpreter one by one sequentially. But each line is read sequentially asynchronously, which means that it doesn't wait for the first line to finish. So this first line will run, and then the second line will run even if the first line isn't finished running or executed. Now that can be a good thing or a bad thing. One of the things that I've noticed is that the reason why Oracle decided to go this route, because there was a big conversation with Microsoft about this when they had ECMAScript. And ECMAScript is just Microsoft's proprietary version of JavaScript. They wanted JavaScript to run synchronously, but the problem with JavaScript running synchronously is that it actually slows down page load times. And that's a big deal when you want people to stay on your page and navigate through your content. So, what a lot of the big brains decided to do was make the entire language asynchronous. Now, this has its positives and negatives, because when you want to go out and get data, that takes time. And so, and I'm not going to go into it today, but in JavaScript, you might be asking, well, hold on, what if the data's not there when you need it? That's why we created a thing called promises. And what the promises do is in certain parts of your code, it asks the code block to wait. Don't run anything else yet. Just wait until I come back and tell you everything's okay. Or I come back and tell you everything's not okay. In any of those scenarios, then you can start executing again. All right? But in this case, we're not going to use promises yet. That's later on down the road. In this specific example, we're just going to talk about variables. So var is our first variable. And like I said, vars are hoisted. And the reason why that's important is that that means that every variable in your code, if it uses the keyword var, is available at the time the script is executed, regardless of whether that line was executed. So if your var that you're looking for is sitting way on down in your script file, be not dismayed. It still has availability at the top of the script, regardless of whether or not it was at the top of the script to begin with. All right, that sounds confusing, but in the end, I want to have you guys know we will not be using vars. Vars are old hat. I'm just showing them to you so you have some context. So we're going to say var fname, and fname is my fancy way of saying first name, and then we're going to create a string. We're going to create a string, or Francis, I apologize. Or let's just create the whole name in this case. Var name, we'll say, and remember, you can make your string literals either using single quotes or double quotes. You might be thinking that's arbitrary, but there's an actual good reason for why we can use single versus double or double versus single. You'll see that later on down the road when we try to manipulate HTML directly. When I say HTML, I mean raw HTML. That means taking raw HTML and writing it as a string in JavaScript and then injecting it into your code in certain places when certain things need to occur. Either way, I'm going to use single quotes because I normally like single quotes. And there's one more thing I wanted to tell you before I continue. JavaScript is a case-sensitive language. So that means that if you type something uppercase or lowercase, it only understands and remembers it that way. So we normally only type things in lowercase. Now I know that in C# and JavaScript we use camel case and things like that, but in Java and C#, not JavaScript, we use camel case. And to give you some context to what that means, camel case is like this: fname, where the first letter or the first letter is not capitalized, and every subsequent word after that is, right? But in JavaScript, I refrain from that. I do not do that. I use only lowercase, and there's a very good reason, and that is because later on down the road, when I want to remember how I wrote this variable name, I need to remember it exactly. Okay, so I'm going to type in what I need. So I need a comma, price is Fiskey, and there we go. But that's not it. Now I have to tell my program or my script to take this data and put it behind the span. So what I actually need to do is I need to look for that span. So we're going to use the document object model here. I'm going to teach you a new function. Document dot get. Now this uses camel case, but that's because they're good developers. Get element by ID. Now, the reason why in HTML I use an ID for this span is because I want to call this ID when I inject the code that I want, or when I inject the value that I want. So if I go back to script.js, I'm going to take hw-name, and I'm going to put it in the document.id. Now, document.getElementById. Now, document.getElementById is a built-in function of the document object model. As we discussed in the last class, or in the last installment, the document object model is something we're going to manipulate to great extent in this course using JavaScript. So, with that being said, let's take a bigger step. Let's look deeper at what this actually means. So, in my document getElementById, I need to specify the ID that I want. If you could look here, REPL actually tells us what we can do with document.getElementById. So in this case, we can have a string that is an ID value, and what it will do is it will return to me the actual document that I want, or the actual value, or the actual HTML tag object that I want. So in this case, I'm going to say hwname. Now, before I continue, there's something I need to do. This is going to return to me the HTML that I'm looking for, that span. So what I want to do now is I want to save that to another variable, var span, right? Cool. Now, if I wanted to verify that I really got the span, what I can do is I can say console.log, and I can look in that variable. So I'm going to run this, and I'm going to keep the console open. You can see it gave me the span that I made. That's what I wanted. I want that span. Now that span exists here. Now all I have to do is update it. So what I can do now is I can say span dot inner HTML or inner text, I apologize, and I can say name. Now what's going to happen? Well, this inner text, this name here, which is my name variable, is now going to fill the span.innerText. All right, let's run this. You can see I have it here. It already populated, which is kind of quite nice. Let me go back and check to see it. Yep, it's empty here in the HTML. So when the page loads, the span is empty. But now, and I already saved it, so. But now, here, because I'm saving my values, my string literal, to the variable name, and then I said I want you to give me this span, right? I want you to give me that span from using the document.getElementById, and then I want you to take that span and use the property. So inner text is a property, right? There's also inner HTML. So if I just so happen to want to put HTML in my page, as I said earlier, remember when I said with string literals you can use single quotes or double quotes? If I wanted to inject or make JavaScript put HTML directly into the page, all I would really need to do is tell the actual code where that object is, and then say, in that tag, I want you to add this HTML. And you can see my name is there now. Now, this is simple, but this is not the best way to do this. As a matter of fact, I would argue very strongly, the actual name var is very, very verbose, and you don't want to be that verbose in the way you develop. You want to be very specific. So pre-ES6, all right, ES6 or ECMAScript 6 is the version where a lot of the things changed, right? Pre-ES6, we use var quite a lot. And then after ES6, which was produced between 2018 and 2019 and adopted by a lot of the browsers, and especially Chromium 2020, 2021, and going forward, we don't use var because var is a security hazard. Remember, I said it's hoisted. So that means that it's available in the page at all times, and it doesn't matter if it was actually executed or not. And that is bad because in most languages, we want our variables to dispose of themselves, right? We want our variables to go away after a certain amount of time, and vars exist for the entire session of that specific page. So we don't use vars. We actually use what's called a let. Now, I'm here to tell you there is no real big difference between var and let, other than the fact that A, lets are not hoisted, meaning that if you don't run that line, it doesn't exist, and B, lets exist as variables do in higher level languages like Java and C#. When a curly brace is encountered and there's a let within the curly braces, it disposes of it. It is no longer available at the browser level or at the session level. I'm sorry, at that specific page level, and that's very, very nice. It doesn't change any of the ways that this runs. If I say run, I'm going to get the same answer. You see how I said hello world and then it added Francis Fiskey? I like how it took some time to actually parse the JavaScript. Normally JavaScript's a lot faster when the browser is not inside this environment. It's a lot quicker than that when you're using Chromium, but because we're using REPL, it's a little slower, and it's quite nice. You can see how it said hello world and then it added Francis Fiskey after the fact. There's one more variable type that I want to tell you about, and then we're going to talk about actual, we're gonna refactor this the way I would do it in the real world as an engineer. So, first things first, let's talk about constants. So what is a constant? A constant is a variable that is locked at compile or interpretation. Now, I'm using the word compilation and interpretation, and I want to explain what those two words mean. So a compilation of files is when you take files and you compile them so that they are executable. Now, what's interesting about JavaScript scripts and things like that, you will realize they are not compilations. You don't have to compile JavaScript to run it in the browser. So what the browser, and the reason why that is because the browser is actually interpreting the files when it runs them. Now, that interpretation does a compilation at runtime. I'm not going to go deep into the weeds about that. There's a lot of conjecture in the development community about what those words actually mean. Just like if you ask the developer what is abstraction, you'll probably get 50 to 30 million different responses. And there's no right or wrong answer because abstraction, just like interpretation and compilation, are very complex ways of looking at the way things work. Just understand that interpretation means that the language that we're writing is actually compiled and interpreted at runtime. All right? You don't have to do any of that beforehand. It happens at runtime. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, when you have a constant is a value that exists and it cannot change after the interpretation or compilation of your files. That actually means that that specific constant variable or that constant is immutable. There are certain immutable properties in real life, pi, and others like that, logarithm. There's other mathematical computations and other things in real life that are immutable. I know in today's day and age, we are addressing immutability in our society, but just understand that in the realm of computer science and the realm of mathematics, there's a lot of immutable properties that cannot be modified and changed unless they are changed at its inception. That means that when you have a constant, you cannot change the value of that constant after the constant has been created. Let's try. So, if I want to create a constant, I would use the word const. If I spelled it right? This is my keyword for constant. And now I want to take my name and I want to place my name in the constant variable. Once again, I'm going to use a string literal because my name is basically a string. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to concatenate my constant name to the actual name. I'm going to name variable, and I'm going to change that variable name to name output. I'm going to create my string literal in a way that is easily understandable, and I'm going to place name in the middle. Now, what did I do here? I'm going to actually change this to name output so it displays correctly. Cool. So what did I do right here? Well, what I did was I combined two string literals, or I concatenated two strings. Now, we're not going over data types right now, but it's inevitable that I would have to talk about data types even while I'm using this time to talk about variables. Now, what's interesting here is I will get the same result. The difference is that my name cannot change now, right? Because it's a constant. If I try to say, and this is funny, right? If I said name equals, let's say I wanted to change it. Let's say I wanted to change it to John, which is my middle name actually, right? What would happen? Well, I would get an error down here in the console, and it says assignment to constant variable. What that actually means is you can't change what's in the constant because it's already been defined. And you cannot say, I want a constant variable without giving it a value, all right? So if we look at this right here, on the right side of this equal sign, this is a value, and on the left side of the equal sign is the key. Remember I said key value pairs exist in objects? They also exist all throughout JavaScript and all programming languages. Now, why is that important? Well, because I can't necessarily change this const after the fact. I could theoretically change this name output after the fact. Let's say I wanted to do that. Let's say I said, you know what? Nah, I want name output to be oops. And I ran that. There it is. It would change. I've effectively overwritten what sits in that memory location. And that happens with all variables. Once you actually write to the variable, you can overwrite to the variable if you so desire, and it will remove whatever value is there. And when I want to overwrite what's in the variable, I don't have to say let again. I just say the variable name. Now, in the case of the constant, I want to show you something. Let's go back to what the constant did, right? I'm going to Control Z all the way back to the here, and let's force this error again. I'm going to force the error, and I get this error down here. But notice, look up here at the HTML. None of the JavaScript continued. It failed. All of it failed. It didn't continue. It didn't render the JavaScript after that line. That's very important. Most of the time, people ask, how would I know an error occurred in JavaScript? Well, you can open up the console and look. You can write your code in such a way that you catch the errors so you know when and where they occur, or you can check the page to see if there's any anomalies with the way that the code's being rendered. Because in most situations, I want to let you guys know, in most situations, the code itself will actually not finish in the event there was an error. Now, if you ask me how I would do this in the real world, this is how I would actually write this. I have a little fuzzy down here. It's making me look like my armpits emitting interesting smoke. But I will say Francis Fiskey. I would actually get rid of all of this. Because I'm manipulating the document object model, I really only needed to do one thing. I needed to get that specific span, right? I need to tell it to modify the inner text, and then I need to tell it what the inner text is. Now, what I'm doing right now is called dot notation. I'm chaining together things that I want to happen, okay? I'm chaining together responsibilities. So I removed 5 lines of code, and I'm treating this inner text like it's a variable, even though it's a property. And I'm saying, I want you to go to the document, which is this page right here. I want you to use the method getElementById, which is built into your libraries. I want you to find the actual element in the HTML document that has this name. And then I want you to modify the property of that element with this value. What do you think will happen? Well, all the things we did with all the variables. Now, you might be asking, but hold on. So then why do we use variables? Well, we use variables when we really need to hold a value at a specific point in time. Variables are extremely powerful. Do not discount the profitability of variables. Just understand less is more. Well, that's all I have to offer for today. And that's all I wanted to talk about today. In the end, this is really going to help you get through some of those JavaScript woes in starting your JavaScript. If you need anything if you want a environment that'll give you more information and help you parse through your JavaScript journey, I implore you to go to codeacademy.com and open up your own account and start their free journey into your development into your development adventure. Otherwise, as I say in all my videos, good luck, have fun, ciao.